All right. Secret of the Golden Flower, chapter 6. Let's just get started, huh? Master Lu Tzu said, "There are many kinds of confirmatory experiences. One must not content oneself with small demands, but must rise to the thought that all living creatures have to be redeemed. One must not be trivial and irresponsible in heart, but must strive to make deeds prove one's words. If, when there is quiet, a spirit has continuously and uninterruptedly a sense of great joy, as if intoxicated or freshly bathed, it is a sign that the light principle is harmonious in the whole body. Then the golden flower begins to bud. When, furthermore, all openings are quiet and the silver moon stands in the middle of heaven, and one has the feeling that this great earth is a world of light and brightness, that is a sign that the body of the heart opens itself to clarity. It is a sign that the golden flower is opening. Furthermore, the whole body feels strong and firm, so that it fears neither storm nor frost, things by which other men are displeased when I meet them cannot becloud the brightness of the seed of the spirit. Yellow gold fills the house. The steps are of white jade. Rotten and stinking things on earth that come in contact with one breath of the true energy will immediately live again. Red blood becomes milk. The fragile body of the flesh is sheer gold and diamonds. That is a sign that the golden flower is crystallized. The book of successful contemplation says, the sun sinks in the great water and magic pictures of trees in rows arise. The setting of the sun means that in chaos, in the world before phenomena, that is before the intelligible world, the foundation is laid. That is the non-polarized condition, ultimateness. Highest good is like water, pure and spotless. It is the ruler of the great polarity, the God who appears in the trigram of shock. Chen, or shock, is also symbolized by wood, and so the image of trees in rows appears. A sevenfold row of trees means the light of the seven body openings or heart openings. The northwest is the direction of the creative. When it moves on one place further, the abysmal is there. The sun which sinks into the great water is the image for the creative and the abysmal. The abysmal is the direction of the midnight. At the winter solstice, thunder is in the middle of the earth, quite hidden and covered up. Only when the trigram Chen is reached does the light pole appear over the earth again. That is the image represented by the rows of trees. The rest can be correspondingly inferred. The second part means the building of the foundation on this. The great world is like ice, a glassy jewel world. The brilliancy of the light gradually crystallizes. Hence, a great terrace arises, and upon it, in the course of time, the Buddha appears. When the golden being appears, who should it be but the Buddha? For the Buddha is the golden holy man of the great enlightenment. This is a great confirmatory experience. Now, there are three confirmatory experiences which can be tested. The first is that when one has entered the state of meditation, the gods are in the valley. Men are heard talking as though at a distance of several hundred paces, each one quite clear. But the sounds are all like an echo in the valley. One can always hear them, but never oneself. This is called the presence of the gods in the valley. At times, the following can be experienced. As soon as one is quiet, the light of the eyes begins to blaze up, so that everything before one becomes quite bright, as if one were in a cloud. If one's eyes open and seeks the body, it is not to be found anymore. This is called, in the empty chamber, it grows light. Inside and outside, everything is equally light. That is a very favorable sign. Or when one sits in meditation, the fleshy body becomes quite shining, like silk or jade. It seems difficult to remain sitting. One feels as if drawn upward. This is called spirit returns and touches heaven. In time, one can experience it in such a way that one really floats upward. And now, it is already possible to have all three of these experiences, but not everything can be expressed. Different things appear to each person according to his disposition. If one experiences these things, it is a sign of good aptitude. With these things, it is just as it is when one drinks water. One can tell for oneself whether the water is warm or cold. In the same way, a man must convince himself about these experiences. Then only are they real. So there's a few really cool, very seemingly poetic expressions in here. I have some highlights. The one must not be trivial and irresponsible in heart. One must strive to make deeds prove one's words. Do you have any thoughts on what that might mean?
Reminds me in the Bhagavad Gita, where our thoughts and our words and our actions need to be aligned so that we are obedient to God speaking to us through our five senses. So by listening to our senses, we then can refine our thoughts, which then create better words, which then create better actions. So there's almost as if this chain of command, and although he doesn't use senses in the text here, but that might be a surrendering to this contemplative heart, this contemplative quality that is receptive and listening, almost in a surrendered state with this, with the sense of self constantly being transparent to something else that's beyond it, beyond itself. So that's a good way of unifying oneself to this concept of good actions and not creating more potentially harmful actions towards yourself or to others that will maybe keep you from the state which we all, in my opinion, really seek.
Sure. And I think even just from a literal perspective, not being irresponsible with heart and not striving to make deeds be proven by words implies a frivolity of energy. When we speak too much and then we don't follow through with what we do, there's an irresponsibility that the heart, because earlier in the book, it was talking about how everything actually comes through the heart. The breathing even comes from the heart. And that's why we want to focus on listening to the heart so that the breathing becomes yoked to the heart, as opposed to trying to breathe in a certain way to calm the heart down. That's sort of backwards thinking. We more want to listen, like the egg or like the chicken that sits on the eggs analogy that we also heard before. And of course, this is a age-old saying of the power of the word. In ancient times, your word was your bond. When you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, everybody calls you a liar, and that's like a big deal. And even in the story, lots of ancient Hindu stories, the power of speech is really how magic things happen when rishis say something. That's how they impart blessings, and that's how they exact curses. the power of saying something and the universe responding because of the power of truth in speech makes it real.
Mhm.
And today that seems like something kind of unbelievable, but we do a lot of frivolous speaking, and I think that's what this verse is sort of pointing us towards.
Mhm. Yeah, good point.
Was there anything on the next page that stuck out to you that you want to touch on?
Well, part of me wants to ask a follow-up question around what you were just saying there. Um, if one is, let's say one is wanting to create like a new project or to create something in the world, I've noticed there's this debate amongst the community of folks that are in the entrepreneurial space, whether or not it's better to speak things to solicit feedback and to solicit people's kind of opinion about what it is you're doing. And once you get some feedback, positive feedback, you might commit to something and say, okay, yeah, you're right, thanks for giving me some feedback, I'm going to do this. And then by speaking it becomes almost this agreement that it needs to happen because now you're doing it, or now you're speaking it into existence. And then I've heard another topic, which is another strategy, which is I think a little bit older, in that if you're going to do something like in the world, you only speak about what you've already done. And that way the words that you're saying are in the affirmative. I've done these things. And then everything that you're going to do, you write down. And it's almost this agreement that you're keeping with yourself. And it's so that you don't speak frivolous words. And you're not subtly asking for other people's approval of your ideas, but instead doing them and seeing if it makes sense to continue to put energy towards those goals. But I find that the first one is much more common in today's culture. People need a lot of feedback around, oh yeah, that's a great idea, you should do that, you should do that. But according to some thinking, that actually dilutes the action because we're not giving it time to develop some sort of power. Or just immediately, as soon as we're feeling something that we want to do it, we're telling everyone about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, this frivolousness with the word, we don't want to be too stoic and to ourselves though either. So I'm wondering what the balance is there.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I definitely don't have any specific answer to it. I think that it definitely depends on the personality type. It depends on the project. As it relates to a spiritual journey like this book, I tend to lean into the keeping silent and only speaking when it's come to more of a fruition, when it comes into more fruition than just declaring your white light experience, for instance, is what some people call it. And sort of that tends to be something that's more irresponsible of the heart, where keeping quiet about the inner experiences of these meditations tends to build power and helps digest something that is still churning and yet to be born from within.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for other projects, I think that it really much depends, because there's a lot of things that are collaborative and asking for other people's expertise in things, making sure that you're asking people in a way that isn't necessarily too open-ended. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, well, if you have a project and you want it to stay your project, or it's still sort of I have a tendency of just thinking out loud sometimes to help know what I'm even thinking about. And so it's good for me to just speak to my wife or whoever's around about what it is I think should happen. And I don't think that's quite as much of what we're talking about here. That's more of a brainstorming session.
Right. Totally. Right. And what I'm hearing is, yeah, when it comes to matter of spiritual experience, then it's best to keep certain spiritual experiences to yourself. Let them ruminate, let them gain power, to gain some sort of magnetic quality internally. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in our day-to-day life that we need to constantly be monitoring our thoughts or our words because otherwise it's going to be irresponsible to the heart. This is more so a subtle aspect of this internal practice that we're doing, where we're breathing from the heart, we're coming from a heart-centered place in our life, and from that place, we need to have some sort of protection from ourselves or from the outside world. And that protection could be choosing to not speak on things that are very fragile and still becoming something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In a similar way, if we have a project, let's call it a passion project, and we haven't quite articulated it yet, maybe even that can also be incubated for a while longer, and the heart can breathe into that idea more. But if it's an idea that is more mundane or in the world, or you'd like some feedback on it, then yeah, to speak on that, but to have some sort of ability to know what needs to be said and what doesn't need to be said, so that energy is preserved, but also needs are being met and collaboration is had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really nice distinction there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's difficult. I feel like that could be a topic all in itself. The the word that comes up to me is boundaries, and knowing which time and place to and people, for instance, to bring these things up with, because if you do it prematurely, the idea could just get squashed, and then you give up on it, even though it may have had a lot of value. It just wasn't the right time, or maybe it wasn't nurtured. So maybe somebody just said that's a stupid idea, and immediately you're like, yeah, it was a stupid idea, and it kind of gets aborted in that way. But
Cool.
boundaries,
One
yeah.
other thing on page 49 that really struck with me is this concept of blood turning into milk.
Mm-hmm.
Red blood becomes milk. Yeah, just that idea of all of our blood being milk. Interestingly, the moon relates to the blood in Ayurveda and in Jyotish and Ayurjyotish. The moon, whenever there's issues with circulation or problems with the blood, we always look at the moon and see the condition and the state of the moon. And also, milk is ruled by the moon. And also the heart is, in the Vedic tradition, there's a lot of meditations that if somebody is having an unsettled heart, let's say their moon is in bad shape, then there's a meditation specifically on the heart region, where the moon isn't, this small, for those that are not able to see, it's not a small zone just near the physical heart, but it has a whole area surrounding the whole chest and almost up to the lower neck. So it really comes to this whole heart center place of the body. And so I really like the imagery there. And also the next line, the fragile body of flesh is sheer gold and diamonds. Wow. This sparkling body, gold, which of course has this sheer to it, this beautiful luster, but it's also quite soft and malleable, while diamonds has this luster that is the hardest substance on earth. So you go from almost the softest metal to the hardest stone, but they both share this beautiful brightness and luster.
Mm.
And then the next line is, this is a sign that the golden flower is crystallized. So I like those images because they give this quality of the red blood becoming milk, and that which is fragile becoming full of beauty, and the gold will never tarnish and diamonds can never be broken. So this there's something that's beyond a state of incubation. There's something beyond this of needing others' approval, or even anything to do with other people at all. This is such a personal thing, and it's not necessarily something that needs to be shared or needs to be spoken about. It's an internal experience that can remain just that. And yet there's these beautiful posts, these signposts. If you're experiencing the subtlety of feeling that is so delicate, we can hardly even talk about it. It's almost like the secret, and therefore we have to describe it in these very nuanced ways. Otherwise you'll miss the essence of it. I don't know. I find some of those things to be, sweet.
Yeah, and there's a progression here too. So it begins with saying, the sense of great joy, as if intoxicated or freshly bathed. It is a sign that the light principle is harmonious in the whole body. Then the golden flower begins to bud. So it's sort of describing a precursor for a beginning. And then it describes the earth full of brightness, and the heart opens itself to clarity. And that's the sign that the golden flower is opening. And then it goes into this poetic imagery that you're describing with the jade, and especially the fears neither storm nor frost. So we're talking about poles here, transcending pleasure and pain, and just feeling just an intensity. And with that intensity, the yellow gold fills the house, and the white jade, and the all things rotten and stinking come in contact with this breath, and true energy will immediately bring it back to life. The red blood becomes milk, sort of gives me an image of when we're in that rhythmic breathing process. I notice my heart does this thing where it like shake, it almost like rocks my whole body. And in that process of breathing, I feel the blood coursing through my body as something very cool and soothing, like milk would feel. Obviously, milk, it's good to have blood still in your veins. I don't think milk, just draining yourself of all the blood and putting milk in there probably wouldn't be the best thing. I don't think a doctor would suggest it, but metaphorically speaking. And then, of course, the final is not final, but the third step is the body becomes crystallized, or the golden flower becomes crystallized. And then to follow up on the non-polarization of the storm and frost, the next paragraph says, the sun sinks in the great water, and magic pictures of trees in row arise. The setting of the sun means that in chaos, the foundation is laid. That is the non-polarized condition. That's really big. That's a really big statement right there. That is poetic and obviously not easily interpretable, but it conjures a sense of a foundation that isn't going to teeter one way towards pleasure or teeter towards avoiding pain. It's a foundation that is resilient to these poles of opposites. And I don't know enough about the I Ching, but then it later starts talking about Chen, and Chen is one of the 64 changes of the I Ching. And so let me just show the image here. Can you read that, or is that backwards?
It's forward. You can read it.
Okay. So yeah, it's backwards for me, so I can't read it, but it gives us this sort of layout of the trigram of shock, Chen.
It also says to arouse, thunder. So if you think about like the shock of thunder.
Right. And of course, thunder always accompanied by lightning. And the lightning goes into the earth. So the imagery to me there is very similar to what you were describing before about the senses and the karmendriyas. So the indriyas are our modes of perception, and they are related to Indriya, and that Indra's lightning bolt being his weapon very much indicates an illumination or an ignition of something that takes all of the senses together and makes it something awakening. It thunders through our complex into our psyche and creates an illumination. And the sevenfold row of trees means the light of the seven body openings or heart openings. So we could be talking about chakras here. And they use the word abysmal. I would use the word more like the chasm. So these streams of our senses are flowing in a certain direction, and they're flowing into these spiraling energy centers inside of our body. Am I off topic here, or do you have another interpretation, or do you think?
I think this is great. I can't help but wonder, maybe we don't want to bring it in, but how this other interpretation that you read, this tree on the cliff, was considered a potential down or pitfall.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't, to me, it seems really clear that that this tree, I just see a possibility for lightning striking a tree, in this way. And if there's these 7 trees on a cliff, all just there, waiting for that lightning to strike, something about that imagery which feels like a very auspicious thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for that matter, imagine once the lightning hits the tree, what happens? The tree falls down the cliff, and the last thing, the last thought, the last feeling, the last fear of falling or surrender, the fear of surrender falls away, and you slip into the abyss. You slip into the deep unknown. And with that foundation that we're describing here, there is no fear anymore. It's like Chogyam Trungpa said, the bad news is you're in free fall. The good news is there's no ground. So yeah, the imagery here to me is also very evocative. It inspires me to want to go deeper and to meditate more fervently. And it reads like a poem, which is also so cool. It's a textbook, and it's a ecstatic poem at the same time.
Yeah, the order is really important, like you pointed out. The imagery is important, but it's very poetic in that, yeah, it all builds on itself.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in the last 2 pages that really stick out to you?
I highlighted, men are heard talking as though at a distance of several hundred paces, each one quite clear. but the
Yeah.
sounds are like an echo in the valley. This
Yeah.
has a footnote here that I think is interesting. The gods in the valley comes from the Tao Te Ching, section 6, and it doesn't tell us really what it means, except in the text itself. It mentions that the gods in the valley are they're heard through like an echo in the valley. One can always hear them, but never one's self. This is called the presence of the gods in the valley. So, do you have any thought on what that could mean?
Man, it's very stirring, isn't it? It's almost as if there's a proximity that's happening here between the personality and the divine, where there's a recognition that there's something beyond oneself that is being heard. But in order to hear it, one has to stop listening to oneself. I think that is the difference, or that axiom to which then the gods in the valley might become nearer and nearer the more and more one stops listening to oneself.
Mm-hmm. Right, but never oneself. One can always hear them, but never oneself. And it's almost as if some words, like we've heard the saying, your heart starts to sing, or the harmony of the spheres and these things that happen of their own accord, but you can't really hear them when there's chatter happening in your mind. And it takes a lot of quieting in order to hear those subtle vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
So now we can maybe start touching on some of these validations. So as soon as one is quiet, the light in the eyes begins to blaze up, so that everything before one becomes quite bright, as if you were in a cloud. Have you had that experience yet? Or at least like the kind of play of light from the focusing your eyes on the nose?
I have just I more resonate with the next sentence. If one opens one's eyes and seeks the body, it is not to be found anymore. This feeling where, I'm slightly feeling a little disconnected from the physical body. Maybe consciousness is hovering around my head or to the left or to the right of me. And then coming back, it's like, oh, where, oh, that's right, here I am. I've had that experience more than the play of lights personally. But maybe would you like to share about your experience with that?
Well, I actually am interested in that because I agree. The practices that I've been used to in the past has been so involved and so in the body, like making offerings and picking flowers and moving around so much, that what really struck me about this practice was the sitting stillness of it.
Mm-hmm.
Made my body go numb very quickly. And instead of feeling uncomfortable when with my more active meditation, my feet started going numb or my legs started going numb, I would sort of just move a little bit and the circulation would come back, and it would, it would just be something I would deal with. But in this meditation, I really just let it happen. And it let it to happen to the extent where I started feeling like I couldn't feel anything from the waist down. And then I started feeling it creep up my back. And the more still I became, the more I didn't really necessarily feel any association with my body, which was very beautiful. Hard to describe, but just I felt a weightlessness, or I felt like I was somehow suspended. My awareness was suspended from any sense of having a body or having any weight
Mm-hmm.
in my body.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a unique experience, being very active most of the time. That was nice. The light thing kind of keeps changing. it's funny because that it was initially something in the beginning that I really liked, because I'm a very visual person, and seeing the lights and then focusing on the lights, not the passing of them from as they move, it became an interesting, fun meditation. But I've noticed more recently that it's become more just internal and more in my heart, and more feel the feeling, as I was describing, the rocking of the heartbeat. That's sort of just like
Mhm.
of its own accord makes my whole chest move. Um, yeah, and then of course we go on to describe the uh, levitation, or actually no, the next one is the fleshy body becomes quite shining like silk or jade. Um, I can't attest to any of that.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to talk to an Ayurveda practitioner about that, because he can make my skin shine. um, what? Oh, and of course, I'm sure you've levitated before. I mean, everybody does that.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, the levitation piece, it seems difficult to remain sitting. One feels as if drawn upward. Is that what you're talking about with levitation?
Yeah, and then it actually goes on to say that he in such a way that one really floats upward eventually in time.
Okay. Yeah. I, I must have missed that. Because to me, this reminds me of the experience of feeling like this image that is depicted right here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to me, it feels as if one stops identifying with this body and then starts to become this subtler body that lives right above the head. And to me, that's what the levitation, or when it says the spirit returns and touches heaven, it's almost as if there's this other spirit that's meditating above the body. And then one feels drawn upward to that place.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be referring to an actual physical levitation too, which sounds like is alluded to later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's more. I think that's more of a realistic way of looking at it for sure. That being said, I have heard of yogis having that mastery, being able to
Yeah.
fly, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
which is clearly a fantastic claim. But I also believe that there's a lot of things that we don't know, we don't understand, and we don't have exposure to. There's a lot of ways of life that are beyond our way of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not counting it out, but it's definitely an intriguing um, concept if we were to take it literally, but also useful insofar as we want to take it metaphorically.
Can I draw us back a little bit?
Sure.
There's one thing I was wanting to highlight with you, and it was back when you were talking about this polarity.
Mm-hmm.
And the setting of the sun means that in chaos, in the world before phenomena, that is before the intelligible world, the foundation is laid. That is the non-polarized condition. Highest good is like water, pure and spotless. It is the ruler of the great polarity, the God who appears in the trigram of Shak, Chen. What is the role of water within the polarity? And there's three things that I'm seeing here. I'm seeing the sun sinks in the great water at the very beginning when the the world before phenomena is created. And then later it says, the highest good is like water, pure and spotless. It is the ruler of the great polarity, the God who appears in the trigram of shock.
Well, I'll take a shot at that.
Yeah.
But this is just an idea, or this is an interpretation. When the sun goes into the water, we're talking about our fixity circumambulating or circulating around the midst of conditions. So the animus comes down and unites with the heavenly light, unites with the primal water, as we were talking about in the earlier chapters. To me, that's what the sun going into the setting into the water is referring to.
Got it.
Then after that, we have, what was the next part you were saying?
The highest good is like water, pure and spotless.
Sure.
It is the ruler of the great polarity.
So the clarity of the water indicates a differentiation. So the water's no longer muddy with chaos. So the sun has come down and distilled the water from the earth and made the muddy water clear. And what was the last part?
The God who appears in the trigram of shock. It is the ruler of the great polarity, speaking about water.
Right.
God who appears in the trigram of shock.
Yeah, so yeah, the ruler that lives and is the ruler of polarity is that subconscious being that's being the flower itself that's being developed through this practice, that ultimately becomes a being in the midst of non-being, or non-being in the midst of being, which ultimately is beyond poles. It's not affected by desires. It's not affected by anti-desires. It is the self abiding process of unity between the animus and the anima.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. And even if I'm wrong, just reading the poetry there's so many ways it could mean, but the archetypal symbols of it are pretty consistent.
Right. Something that's coming to mind right now is this sentence that's the highest good is like water, pure and spotless. And what it's reminding me of is, as the fixation, as the sun comes into the chaos of water, is the water ever unpure? Or is it that there's things in the water that are unpure? And the water itself is always pure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it is the highest good, pure and spotless. So the true nature of the water is pure and good. And I can't help but think how water is often associated with desire and is associated with the planet Venus and also sometimes the moon, which can create a flavor to the water, let's say, as you would call it, this undifferentiated state between the water and that which is in the water. It's one thing, because water is the most, it's the best solvent we know of. So it dissolves everything into itself. But the water itself is actually always pure. It just also happens to be holding things that might be less than pure. But yet when the sun comes down, yeah, there is this, I love your word differentiation, it differentiates the water between that which isn't water. And then this polarity bit that's happening there, where the fixation and the water come, and because there's this polarity quality, that then things that are not of the nature of the poles tend to remove themselves. Because how could it be otherwise? If there's two pure poles, the polarity between them will create such a magnetic field that everything will be differentiated that isn't of the pole. And then later it talks about how this is the moment of shock. And I like the word arousing for shock, because what it reminds me of is this point of arousing, or this magnetic moments where the two poles, without any sort of let's call it pollution, things that are getting in the way of these poles to really magnetize, is the life force energy that then starts to create this experience of, then the next thing it talks about is the image of the row of trees. The sevenfold row of trees means the light of the seven body openings, or heart openings. I like your comparison to chakras. And interestingly, the northwest direction is that associated, I'll have to confirm the deity that's associated with that direction. I don't want to say here.
Varuna.
What?
Varuna.
Varuna?
Varuna.
Yeah. Can you speak on Varuna a bit?
It's either Varuna or Vayu. Actually, now that I think it might be actually Vayu. I think, but Varuna is in the west and Vayu's in the northwest. But yeah, ultimately, it's Varuna's the ocean. He is the waters.
Right.
But even if it's Vayu, Vayu is the wind, and so in both cases, they're definitely a quality of media. There's a medium. Actually, let me just
but this Chen principle, this magnetic frequency between the poles, almost like electricity coming between the fire impulse and the water impulse.
Right. And the differentiation between the heavenly fire and the primal water coming together and creating, through their union, a mixture that is moist and light, where all the things from the water fall down to particulate, and you wind up with this flower that comes about of its union.
I really like this this heart-centered practice, to imagine all of this happening in the heart as opposed to the crown of the head. Or even in the forehead, where this union could potentially happen. I mean, the union's happening in a lot of different places in the Vedic tradition, but I find it to be really nice and sweet to think about this happening in the heart region.
Agreed. It's really much more of a direct path of embodiment. It just strikes right at the core of your being by getting the breath involved, getting the heartbeat involved, by listening to the heart, like literally, like the most common thing that we often hear from our parents or from our friends. Just listen to your heart, your heart, and there's so many great examples of just follow your heart or whatever. It's kind of obvious, but at the same time, when we through these practices, these obvious things become more and more profound because there's more and more meaning that gets attached to what those things mean. It doesn't just mean to listen to your heart and, do the thing that you think you should. It also means listen to your heart, because if you listen closely enough, you will hear the gods in the valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the accessibility piece. The more you do it, the more accessible it is throughout the day. Like, yeah, listen to your heart has become such a cliche thing, because I think maybe for a lot of people it could be because they don't actually know the path to their heart, or they haven't necessarily put in the time or the effort to learn the path to the heart. If you want to go to an extraordinary place, you have to plan and know how to get there. It has to be a very dedicated, precise thing.
Yeah. And it's not comfortable.
No.
It's downright painful at times. And there's a lot of endurance of both pain and boredom. And there are time and time again, we have to peel back the lethargy of this differentiation process, and maintaining a resilient aspect of curiosity and interest, and to continue to probe deeper into that mystery. And on top of that, when you first start, or even now, I still feel claustrophobic from time to time in the exercise, and looking for space. And so listening to the heart in those moments is really hard, because there's a lot of other things screaming, I want out, do something else.
Man, well, what another great session today. This one, really sweet. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thanks for your insight. It's always something more than I thought it could be. So it's a short one, but it was definitely I would argue one of the most poetic. And poetry with a spiritual journey is a recipe for delicious discussion, as far as I'm concerned. And I hope I guess we'll definitely do chapter 7 sometime next week before your trip. But I hope we can pick it up again once you come back for your trip. You want to talk about your trip a little bit? It sounds really exciting. Really
good. Yeah,
I could go with you.
I'm doing a 2-week backpacking trip around the Lake Tahoe, which is an alpine lake in California. And it's the longest backpacking trip I've ever done. Trying to do it as light as possible this time. And yeah, I'm doing a pilgrimage of sorts, entering into my sun Mahadasha after being in Venus for 20 years. So it's a big transition for me, and going to be singing a lot of songs and making some offerings to the land. And really just enjoying being out in this beautiful earth that we have to explore.
Very cool. Well,
Thanks for asking. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, if I can't be there with you physically, I would definitely be there with some spirit, and be sure to send me pictures. Obviously, be there and turn your phone off while you're out there. Unplug. Definitely worthwhile to do. But
I'll take a picture too.
All right. Well, until next time, enjoy your trip, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
All right.
See you soon, brother.
Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next time.